Journeys. My name is Denise Hurley. I'm the host. And this is my show about interviewing different people who have very interesting backgrounds and have had an interesting life. And I have today Lex Thomas, and you may know Lex from all the work she's done around town with, I think it's Sterling Meeting House News.
Sterling Meeting House News. I was the editor for many years.
You were there, and then you've done some work here
and with the town.
Yep. So I think people will be quite familiar with her work there. But there's some other things that she's very involved in that I wanted to talk to her about. And one of the things is that you're a writer and an editor. Mm-hmm. And could you talk a little bit about your writing? I'm very interested about the flash genre that you mentioned.
Yeah. I've been a writer really all my life, and began it professionally back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. In Canada, in Calgary. And it's something that continues to this day. I actually met my husband through poetry back in 1996. And although he's an engineer, he's not a writer, but he is actually a very fine writer and a very fine poet. And over the years, I've done a lot with both fiction and nonfiction. Mm-hmm. As an editor, of course, I was always dealing as a newspaper editor with newspaper stories and that sort of thing. Prior to that, in my work in Canada, I was also a journalist, a reporter, and I was also a political press secretary. So very used to, churning out press releases, all of that, dealing with those sorts of things. So for me, that short and get to the point, get in and get out of it, it comes very naturally, and that's how the flash fiction comes into it, and flash nonfiction. Flash is a genre that encompasses, it's generally considered to be under 1,500 words, but it can be as much as as little as 10 words or 20 words. It can be, but the thing is that you have to tell a story.
Okay.
In that amount of space. Okay. So just like a novel or whatever, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Sure. But that I find very satisfying, the same way. I love reading it. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a voracious reader. Mm-hmm. I read everything I can get my hands on, both fiction and nonfiction. Okay. But I love anything brief because, and I compare it to cooking is one of my other real loves, I compare it to eating a cookie or a cupcake rather than having to get through the entire cake. So, there's something very satisfying about that, both with writing it and in reading it.
Okay. Do you have a favorite topic that you write about?
Interesting question. I've written a great deal on kind of the human condition, on family dynamics. Okay. I had the really mixed blessing of having been raised by a severely mentally ill mother. And this is diagnosed. This is not just nasty daughter talk.
Sure.
She was schizoaffective, she was schizophrenic and bipolar. And dealing with her, plus she was totally resistant to treatment and whatnot, and even to medication. Yeah. So I've spent, now she's been gone since 2005, but I've spent a considerable part of my life, both as an adolescent. When I was a child, I was largely shielded by my grandparents and other relatives. Once I became an adolescent, became much more familiar with it and much more aware of it. And of course, as an adult, very much so, because there were then repeated hospitalizations and that sort of thing. And it's a situation that never resolved itself satisfactorily. And of course, now she's gone. So that, the family dynamics, the whole dynamic of mental illness, depression, all of that gets very much into my writing. But I also just like to just sort of, pick from whatever comes into my head. And so that's that's where the ideas come from, which is not an answer, but it's
No, that's
it's
cool.
where it comes from.
Now, do you publish? I imagine you get everything published.
Yeah. Well, not everything, but and I really need to be much more aggressive and assertive about publication. Problem is that right now, as just a freelance writer, I'm very busy. I'm working on actually a couple of novels right now that I'm editing for, and one is for a first-time author.
Okay.
And then I maintain a freelance practice, which is also, press releases, articles, corporate newsletters, all that sort of thing. And, so that takes up a lot of my time. I'm still involved very much, like in poetry workshops, work a lot with the wonderful Susan Roney O'Brien, who is in Princeton, wonderful, wonderful poet, as well as a dear friend, and kind of my poetry mentor as well. So I do a workshop that she leads. I'm also going to be taking on the Zoom management of the Thirsty Lab series, which is a poetry reading series that she hosts.
Really? Yeah.
And so it's busy. The advantage of it is, of course, I work from home, so I can work in my jammies.
Good. That's the way they do it.
And
right?
you know how it is with Zoom and whatnot. You're sure that you have something presentable on up top, and then
at
your
least
jammies.
This much,
exactly,
right?
yeah, and then your jammies on, and I just love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the editing different projects for other authors. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that's always a really interesting process because it's much easier if you're dealing with an author that you've worked with before. And it's very different from my work, say, as a newspaper editor, where a journalist, say, would submit a story and then it was up to me. I had the final say as to, and we're not only talking about just, obviously there's the grammar and the spelling and whatnot, but, sentence construction, how a story comes together, how it's put together. When you're dealing with a novelist, it's a little bit different because they have the final say. So what happens is that I get a manuscript that is presented to me, usually online, and then using editing software, I go through it. I make of course, there are the grammatical and the spelling changes, but I also if the author agrees to it, which they usually do, I make recommendations on how a story is structured, on storyline, credibility, that sort of thing. But then it's ultimately up to the author to decide what they are going to accept and what they're not. And there are so many famous examples. You go from the fabulous Stephen King, who has worked, I believe, with the same editor for many years. Sadly, it's not me. But he apparently typically will submit 900 pages of a manuscript, which in the hands of this editor will come down to a manageable 375 or 400 pages, which not only implies a tremendous talent on the part of the editor, but also a lot of trust between writer and editor. And also the awareness on the part of the author that you can't get married to your words, that there is another perspective. The other side to that is the late Anne Rice, who was famously never allowed a word of her work to be edited. So
Really?
yes. So the way that it appeared in print was as she wrote it, which, for better or for worse, I mean, she has a tremendous legion of fans, but to some, that has been problematic in her writing.
Yeah. You think her works would have been maybe better if someone stepped in?
Better is not necessarily the right word.
Okay.
I mean, obviously she had wonderful stories, and as I say, her fans are they're legion.
Yep.
But I think that anybody can benefit from having that extra pair of eyes to look and make suggestions and just pare things down. Because it's really easy to get, and the phrase that I use is married to your words.
Right,
It's very, but you know what they say about killing your babies. Sometimes you just have to do it, and but that's always a very, very tough process, especially for somebody that's going through it for the first time. My first time author that I'm working with right now made the comment the other day that they are not sure at this point whether what was harder, the writing of the novel or the editing process. So it takes a lot of, it takes trust on both parts, and on the part of the editor, it takes, tact and diplomacy too, because you really want this to be the very, very best. And the thing is, as I always say to anybody that I'm working with, and this is true whether I'm working on editing or whether I'm working with a public relations client on, say, a speech or on a media statement, when I point these things out or when I ask tough questions, I'm asking them in order to help you to frame your story.
Sure.
When it's asked by a critic, or if a critic comments, or a media type, is asking the questions, it's more of a gotcha situation.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So that's a real difference.
Yeah. So you just have to let your client know that I'm trying to help you
Exactly.
with your work, and that's what I'm here for.
But it also is, it's a balancing act because it still has to sound like that writer.
Right, okay.
If I'm writing a newspaper story or I'm writing a speech, or that's very, very different.
Sure.
I can really put a lot of my own tone and my own style into it.
Right.
If I'm writing something, if I'm editing something that somebody else has written, it still has to sound like that person.
Right, okay.
It can't sound like me.
So that's a real skill to have and to develop, to be able to do that.
It's taken a lot of practice,
Yes.
and but I really enjoy it. I love doing it, And the editing projects, they tend to last like many, many months.
Oh, sure.
Because when you're doing something that's, many, many chapters and whatnot, you're going through it bit by bit and you're cross-referencing and you're trying to, get all the characters straight and whatnot. And sometimes even an author will do things like, and not even realize is that the character that was named John in chapter 2 has become David in chapter 10.
Oh.
And so then you're cross-referencing to say, well, okay, well, this is who you're talking about, right? But, but you've renamed him, so you have to make up your mind and whatnot. So there's a lot of those things, as well as, of course, spelling, grammar, all that sort of thing.
So you kind of have to be a mentor, a mom, all that kind of
all those
thing,
things.
working with these authors.
Yeah,
Do you have quite a few that you're working with right now?
Several that I've worked with. There's 2 that I'm working with right now, but over the years there have been a number that I've worked with.
Yeah.
So, and some of them, one in particular is a repeat, and so that's always much, much easier because they know what I'm about, I know what they're about, and so we kind of, those parameters are really set before we even start. With the first timers, it's always a little harder because, and of course, by the time an author gets to submitting their stuff to an editor, they think it's pretty good.
Okay.
And I mean, I've had authors that have said to me, I want you to take a look at this. I think it's just about ready to go, and then, no, not really, and so, that's always a little bit fraught as well, but it's fun. I enjoy it. And, and I work very hard to maintain good and supportive relationships with because what it takes to write a book, is just enormous, both in terms of time, in terms of energy, in terms of just what it takes out of you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for a budding author, novelist, on how to start if someone wants to start writing a book? What should they do?
Write every single day. When I'm doing workshops, I frequently ask writers, what is the biggest challenge a writer faces. And the answer that I get most often is, critique, somebody reading it. And I'm no, go back. And the biggest challenge is the blank page or the blank screen.
Yeah.
And that's true whether you're writing a piece of fiction or whether you're a journalist writing an article. You have got a screen or a page, depending on how you do it. And people do it both ways. I've worked with writers who, do everything longhand and then either transcribe it or have it transcribed into their computer. And most people do things online right now and do things on their computer, rather, And but yeah, it's that blank screen. And just another, another piece of advice, and this comes right from Stephen King. Writers need to both read, but they need to write. It is getting your bottom into that chair and sitting there and doing it. And of course, that's a challenge because, I know that as a writer myself, the distractions are huge. There's the refrigerator. That's always a good distraction. There's laundry. There's always laundry to do. Maybe the windows all need to be opened up or closed.
Yep.
The animals need to be fed. The distractions, and then of course there's that relative I haven't spoken to in months. You should give them a call. And before you know it, days and days and sometimes weeks have gone by that you haven't really done a thing. You haven't got your bottom into that chair to actually sit there and write. Writers write, and that's what they need to do. And it's hard. And you do it whether or not you feel like it.
Right.
Because the words don't always flow.
Right.
It's like going to a job. It is a job. It becomes a job. When you go to work, do you wake up every single day and say, oh, I just can't wait to get there. What a great day this is going to be. For most people, more often than not, it's exactly the opposite. It's like, oh, Lord, I got to do this again.
Right.
But you do it. And writing is very much the same. It is a real discipline, and that is tough to learn, and it's tough to maintain.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Now I'm going to jump with your involvement with your speech writing. Julian Assange.
Yeah, that was real. It wasn't for Julian Assange. She was, of course, in custody. But I was very recently involved in a rally in Washington, D.C., there's a couple of organizations. This one is called Hands Off Assange, and what they're basically trying to do is prevent Julian Assange's extradition to the United States. And this particular rally had a number of speakers, and I was a speechwriter for one of them. But this is an issue because you get into issues of freedom of the press, what is considered journalism, what isn't. It's a very, very hot button issue. And of course, as a writer, I feel very strongly about those things. And I enjoy speech writing. It's been a part of my work right back from my political days back in Canada. It was a part of my job that I especially loved. And because there's so much that goes into, and just, a couple of things that people don't generally know. You give a 20-minute speech. How much of that is actually retained by your listeners? It's a shocking less than 2 minutes of it is going to be retained. So speeches have to be message driven. They have to have an ask, something that you want the listeners to do. You have to really have an idea of what is the message that I want this listener to hold on to. And so that's what makes it a real challenge,
Sure.
and what makes it fun. And I think with that particular speech, it went from the first draft. I think that we finally got where everybody was happy with it by about the fourth draft. Because then, of course, it had to go through not only the person that was delivering the speech, but also their policy people, their chief of staff, all those people who really feed into it and whatnot. Plus, just tuning into the speaker's natural tone, how they project, how they tend to speak. This speaker wanted it quite folksy, and so that's fine. It's just that you need to get to that point. But it's a part of my work that I really like, and the Julian Assange effort is something that I will be continuing to work on as a volunteer as
Sure.
well. Because as I say, it's an important issue.
Okay. So this is about, you mentioned freedom of the press and
Freedom of speech.
And okay.
Julian Assange was the publisher of WikiLeaks.
Right.
And, got into all kinds of hot water with information that was released that was not particularly flattering to several countries, including the United States.
Right. Okay.
And then, of course, people got very up in arms about him, releasing military secrets
Right.
and whatnot, whereas what he released was all a matter of record. Nothing was made up. It may not have been information that any particular country wanted released, but how are people going to make decisions about their government, about their leaders, about what is happening in the world, unless they have a very clean and honest representation of facts? And that a lot of people would argue, and I'm among them, is not what we get with the media these days. We get a very, very, everything is really slanted toward whatever side a particular media outlet is on.
Right. Yes.
And that is becoming more and more problematic.
Okay. So this is something that you want to see change, and that's
Yeah.
the type of work that you want to do, the volunteer work.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
And the group that you're involved in, that's what their goal is to.
Absolutely. And this is also this is a worldwide thing. The rally that I attended was part of, there were rallies that happened throughout the world in London, and that was headed up by Assange's wife.
Okay.
And, and these just get thousands and thousands of supporters in London. It was just huge. But I think there was also one, they had them also in Spain, in France, in Australia, which is Assange's home country. In the States. I think there might even have been things in Canada, possibly in South America. So yeah, there's a lot of people looking at this, and
Do you find that it's a cross section of all types of people that are involved in this, or more younger people, or?
It's a cross-section. I was really amazed at the rally in D.C. that it spanned all age groups. And just talking to people, just people of various experience, people in different fields and whatnot. One of the things that's really important, and why I was really happy to see young people there, is these are the people we need to engage. We have such a tiny, tiny number of voters that come out. Here in Sterling alone, I think this last election, if I'm not mistaken, and I may be misspeaking, but I don't think it was even 1% of voters who came out. That's unfortunate.
It is. I totally agree.
And so we need to engage younger people, and it's a different world. Kids now are looking at things very, very differently than, when I look at my own son, who's 29 years old. By the time I was his age, I had a house. I hadn't started a family yet, but, I had, a certain amount of economic stability and whatnot. It is so different for kids now. Mm-hmm. And I know when I'm saying kids, and of course I fall into that typical trap that you call anybody under 40 a kid,
right.
But, young adults now that are just entering the workforce, finishing their educations, trying to make their way in the world, when I was growing up, the dream was always, and the dream of my family was that, well, the kids in the family would do better than we did, know. And now there's no way of doing that, I basically don't know anybody my own age who doesn't have an adult child living at home, or and it's not because they're lazy and they don't have jobs and they don't want to. It's none of those things. It's just that it's become an impossibility, and for them an economic impossibility. We have a system now that really looks after the top 1%, the billionaire class.
Yes.
Well, what about the other 99%?
Exactly.
The people that have to choose between groceries and prescriptions? Mm-hmm. The people who can't afford heat? Or, this is just getting it, and it's snowballing. And so we have got to engage that younger generation who are the people so impacted by this, and that will be impacted now for years.
Absolutely.
For decades.
So, well, I think that's wonderful that your group is trying to do something.
Well, it's not. This is a group that's headed up by people in DC, and very experienced people, and I was very, very lucky to kind of stumble into this, and then just really found that I can stand behind this.
Okay. How do you feel about the differences here in Canada in that respect?
That's a question that people have always asked me. I was born in Canada, and lived the first 4 decades of my life basically in Canada, although I had traveled a lot. And now I've been here in the States for 26 years. And right from the start, people have asked me, is it the same? Is it different? And, it really, it is different in many ways. I feel that, and here again, the country has changed a lot. Canada has changed a lot in those years. And I still maintain very close relationships with some family members, and especially with some friends that I worked with in politics in Canada who have said, it's not the same here anymore. What used to be, considered, the free medical system and that sort of thing, that has run into problems there as well. So Canada has its problems as well.
Sure.
But, it's basically, I find it to be a kinder, gentler, society and community.
Yep.
And one of my stock answers when I first came to the United States is that whereas Canadians, as we age and as we go on in our careers, we hope to succeed, we hope to do our best, Americans expect to. There's a great sense of entitlement that Canadians don't have quite as much of. And that's something that I find a little more endearing about Canadians.
Sure.
Yeah. But then again, I love the States too, and this country has been very good to me. And of course, my son, who was born in Canada, but was 3 years old when we came here, he considers himself very much an American.
Okay.
And so, so this is a discussion that we have
I
often
bet.
at home. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I think I want to thank you for coming on my show. This was very informative, very interesting. Do you have anything to say to our audience?
Simply keep watching. Make sure you get out there and vote.
Yes, vote.
And make sure that you stay involved in what's going on in the community. There's been so much growth here in Sterling, too, which is lovely to see, And I do want to thank you so much for inviting me and for having me. It's been a delight.
Okay. Well, you're
Thank
very
you,
welcome.
Denise.
You're welcome, Lex. Okay, and I want to thank everybody for watching. My name is Denise Hurley, and this is Journeys. I'll see you next time. Bye.